So is the government making real progress on its promise to fix defence procurement, or are we seeing more of the same? Carla Qualtrough is Canada's Minister of Public Services and Procurement, who is overseeing the proposed overhaul of the defence procurement process, and she's with me now. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to speak with me. Your government's now more than halfway through its mandate, so let's start there. How close are you to fulfilling that election promise, which was to fix the military procurement system?
You know, it's a really clunky, antiquated system, Peter. That's what I can say honestly, is we inherited a system, you know, whether you look at jets or you look at the ships, we hadn't really, the system hadn't been modernized for decades. We hadn't even built a ship in decades. So at the same time as we're trying to modernize our processes, make them more agile, make them more responsive to supplier needs, make them more timely, we're rebuilding industries at the same time. So and we're revamping policy. So there's a whole bunch of different tracks. If you look at procurement, you can't really look at it in isolation.
Okay, so can you point to one project, one deliverable where you can say the steps we're taking are actually getting the equipment more quickly than we used to get it before?
More quickly, I could say we're getting equipment that we didn't ever get before. Look at our shipbuilding strategy. So we hadn't built a ship in Canada for 30 years. So the National Shipbuilding Strategy, I was in C-SPAN in Vancouver in December, and we launched our first ship under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. So if you think of what we've done and what this industry has done in Canada, on both coasts, it's pretty extraordinary.
But is anything showing up more quickly than, or is going to show up more quickly under this new process than it did before? Because that's one of the key issues, is to get equipment in a timely fashion.
Well, there's two key issues, right? There's the cost and there's the timeliness. And what I am always challenging officials and both shipyards is to give me realistic numbers, right? Don't tell me it's going to be delivered at a certain point if it's not going to be. Like so then we can work with the shipyards, we can work with industry to be more creative about how to get things quicker or how to do things more cost effectively. But if we don't know, and part of the challenge, I think, in my estimation on the process side, right? I can't really talk as much about the needs side, but certainly on the process side is we weren't, as a government, whatever stripe, always very, I'd say, direct with what this is actually going to cost. We didn't do the homework to understand the actual
Right, we've
costs.
all seen that. We've seen initial estimates for stuff,
and then
double,
then you're
triple,
stuck at a budget,
quadruple.
right? You're stuck at a budget, and then someone says, well, you're over budget. Well, quite frankly, that wasn't costed right in the first place.
Okay, let me drill down on a couple. Let's take the fighter jets, because I think everyone, they're kind of the focal point of the conversation in a lot of ways around procurement. And everybody knows what a mess the process has been over the years. You've dialed back the process now for replacing the old CF-18s, and instead you're going to buy interim jets, almost as old though, from Australia. We were supposed to see new fighter jets delivered in 2025. Documents provided to industry last week show the new targets now 2031. How's that an improvement on military procurement?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we're going to see the new interim. The first interim plane is going to come to Canada in 2019. So we're going to start supplementing our existing fleet as early as next year. The first plane in the full fleet replacement is going to come in 2025. It'll be the 31 when they're all delivered, but we're going to start seeing the full fleet replacement as early as 2025.
Is that? I mean, the process to replace the fighter jets is, do you know off the top, how many years is this behind schedule now, given all the delays?
I probably couldn't even tell you, and I wouldn't want to guess.
I'm not sure how many people could, but it's probably 2 decades since the process started.
We've needed planes for decades, absolutely. And we've been talking, government, when I say we, government, regardless of stripe, has been talking about it. And I'm pleased that we said we would do it, and we did it. I'm super comfortable right now with the timelines we're on, Peter, partially because I'm very confident now that because of our new defense policy, we know what we need, and we're now going out and getting it.
But do you think when you promised Canadians to fix procurement, they had in their minds that we'd be looking at 10 more years before there are new fighter jets, given all the delays we've had in the process so far? Because you do have an option to speed this up, and we're going to get to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Canadians are thinking about how long. It sounds like a long time, but as you dig into it, you need the time to engage with industry, to engage with suppliers, to make sure everybody has their ducks in a row. Because if you want an open, fair, transparent process that yields as many competitive bids as possible, because that's when you'll get the best result, this is what you got to do.
There won't be a request for proposals for at least another year on the jets. There won't be a winner chosen until late 2021, early 2022. 4 years before we actually get the work started. You may not even be the government by then.
Fair enough.
Explain why it needs to take that long.
A couple of things. So first of all, we need to take the time in the next year and a half to work with industries. So the next deadline we have is next Friday, February 9th. Companies have to indicate an interest to be on our supplier list.
They want to be on the supplier list.
Right, so that's the next
Probably going to be 5, maybe 6 companies.
Most likely, yeah, that seems about right. You know, we don't know. We had a very productive and successful industry day last week where we had over 108 companies, 200 participants. After that, we'll announce the supplier list kind of end of March, and then we'll work with those suppliers to finalize the requirements of the RFP. And quite frankly, industry has told us that they need that year in order to get their consortiums together and make sure they have everything they need in order to put forward the most robust and successful bid.
Okay, so you're saying that there's no way you can go right to the competition and...
well, we are in the competition.
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than a longer process to choose the supplier. And
well, it's an interesting choice in a procurement process when you decide to do a suppliers list, because basically what you do is you weed out the companies that don't even meet basic technical requirements for a job, and then you're really working with the players who are ultimately...
You get the players who are not only the most interested,
Exactly.
but the people who can actually deliver.
Exactly,
okay.
right?
So the Auditor General's now looking into all of this again, and we know what happened. We know what happened last time the office investigated the Conservatives and their planned purchase of F-35s. That ended up cancelling that plan, or certainly having the Conservatives call for a full review. Do you know what he's looking at this time? Has he been in contact with your office? What's he asking for?
No, certainly not to any greater extent, detail. I expect him to be looking into the process, in terms of how we're going to run this, what our requests for, what information we're going to require, how long is going to take, who we're going to engage with, making sure it's competitive, all the things. My understanding is focused on the process.
What if he says forget the interim purchase and get straight to the purchase of a new fleet?
I don't know. I don't know if that'll be within the scope of his advice, but if he gives us that advice, I suppose we'll have to look at it.
Would you be open to I mean, you've invested a lot now in saying we're buying interim planes and going through this.
I feel disrespectful saying I wouldn't be open to it, because the Auditor General deserves that respect.
But you think you've got a plan and you're sticking to it?
We have a really solid plan here, and I'm very comfortable with the advice and the direction given by the Chief of Defence Staff and our Defence Minister. And if they think this is the best way to go about doing this, then I will try and make their process as streamlined as possible.
Why do governments, not just yours, why do governments insist on requiring that successful bidders on military procurement projects have to provide regional economic benefits back to local defense companies? I mean, don't we end up paying for it at the end of the day anyway? They provide incentives back as part of the bid, but don't they just price it into the bid?
Well, yes and no. I mean,
because the alternative is to say, look, let's set that aside. Let's buy the best value equipment at the best possible price, and we won't build in this incentives piece. Why is that?
Well, because I think that we're not only looking, when we assess bids, we don't just look at absolute cost. We look at, and technical merit. So those are the two deal breakers, right? We look at economic benefit. So we want to use these kind of major procurements to create jobs in Canada, to bolster Canadian industry, to support Canadian innovation, to revitalize industries. There are broader public policy objectives here that we have chosen. And to your point, we could have chosen not to, but we have made the fundamental choice to pursue these broader objectives through this mechanism.
Okay. A couple of other areas to cover here in the time we have left. And this comes up a lot, and I know you've heard it. Why don't governments just create a single department to deal with military procurement instead of having Treasury Board, Public Services, your department, Economic Development, all involved in the process, and then there are all those hands, there are all those, in the past you've heard the criticism, people empire build, they want to protect their little piece of the pie or whatever the project is they're working on, and that it complicates the whole process. And at the end of the day, when there's trouble, there's no one to hold accountable.
Right. I think right now, I mean, from a machinery of government point of view, the way I've come to look at it in my new role is, you know, a separate department or agency will identify their needs, and then we will secure that for the most part. And then departments have a certain amount of procurement they can do, but fundamentally big procurement is us, because we're focused on process. I think as I look, as part of my mandate, to modernize our procurement, because when we talk about modernizing procurement, we're not just talking military procurement, we're talking overall machinery of government procurement initiatives. I think we might have to look at how we can better streamline relationships, and we don't want the hitch to happen on our side, right? We need to make this as easy for people to participate in, as transparent as possible. We need the most competition. I mean, there's some really laudable goals here that are really difficult to achieve all at once.
What have you seen so far in the time you've been in this new role? I mean, have you had Are you running up against it already? Are you finding
From a procurement point of view, yeah. I mean, we see that as well-intended as individuals are or departments are, the idea of working together on a whole-of-government approach, which hasn't always been done. We've all worked in our silos for a number of years in government. That's where we're comfortable. It takes a little bit of movement. It takes a bit of pushing, but we have, which is why we have a cabinet committee on defense procurement, right? We sit down as a group of 5 or 6 ministers, and we take a whole-of-government approach to our purchasing.
Right, so are you saying that this is a learning curve for the bureaucracy here? That there's still people pushing back against this idea that
I think they're learning to work with a different
larger
kind of
roles
government.
they may have once played are now
a little bit. I think it's more that they're learning to work with a different style of government, a government that does more horizontal integration when we talk policy and purchasing and spending, and I think that's a different approach.
Okay, let's finish on this. You adopted a new approach, and I think you and I discussed it at the time you announced it, to defense procurement that includes assessing whether, it's all procurement actually, whether bidders have taken actions that could harm Canadian economic interest. When you announced the policy in December, I don't think we had the criteria for how you think you're going to apply it. Any closer to that? What are the rules going to be to determine whether someone's
economic benefit, economic harm. I understand what you're saying.
A friend of Canada or not a friend of Canada?
Well, we've definitely taken some steps in the right direction. So at Industry Day, we announced to the suppliers that were there that we were actually separating the broader discussion around this kind of clause for procurement from this particular procurement. It will apply in this procurement, but we recognize that more than the aerospace industry has to be at the table if this is going to be a whole of government applicable clause. So if other procurements, as I've committed that they will also have this clause apply. So we are, in parallel, the process for the content of this clause is being discussed broader with other industries.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand. So it won't apply in the...
It will apply in this one, 100%.
Okay, all right.
But we're talking with more than just the impacted suppliers for this one in the development of this clause, because more industries will be impacted. I hope I'm explaining myself right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it just applies broader. So we need to talk with more people.
All right. So I guess where are we at with Boeing? Is Boeing going to be on that supplier list on February 9th?
Well, as I've said, everybody is welcome and encouraged to any company that wants to be part.
But your government said that Boeing is not a trusted partner because of the trade action they took against Bombardier. They lost it. So do you still
But we've
feel,
also
do you
said
still
that
feel that
every
way?
company is absolutely welcome to apply to this process, that the economic benefit / impact will be assessed at the time bids are assessed. So we're talking the year and a half from now. That gives companies time to put themselves in position that I'm hoping this will incentivize companies to put their houses in order.
But you see,
so
what this comes back to is, okay, Boeing took action against Bombardier. That presumably made it not a trusted partner, not necessarily a friend of Canada to that extent. And now that action is done. And so will that still be held against Boeing in the bidding process for new fighter planes? So
right, and I think
they fought and lost, but because they took us on,
understood,
are they?
No, understood, absolutely. I understand exactly what you're saying. And I think that as we work through the language of this clause and as we work through assessing these bids once they come in, very important decisions will have to be made in terms of the timelines we'll be looking at, what activities we'll be looking at. I mean, that all has to be fleshed out yet.
Right, so there's a chance you could say if you're not actively involved in a fight with the government, you're a trusted partner again.
Or whatever the language ends up being. Yeah, absolutely. But it could be that we look back over the past number of years, or that we look back over the time of the RFP process. I mean, and that's what we need to talk to industry about. That's what we need to talk to our officials about. But to be very clear, suppliers will know what will be expected of them once the final RFP documents are released.
All right, Carla Qualtrough, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.